how to attack them. And I thought that was great, because what if he would have just assumed that I don't have to really go seek God's advice because I know what he wants, attack the Philistines. I've already asked him once, but this time was important. So every time, we see how he is successful in that. So we find they're routed. We find that really this is the last of the Philistine threat. It really is. He has really broke the back of the Philistines. So we want to look at some of the objectives that David is trying to establish. What is he trying to do as king? And we know that he is always seeking the advice of God. So these are not specifically listed in a scripture that says, and David had these 3 objectives. But we can tell because of, one, the blessing that was given to him, the promise, and then we can see his actions, and the other part is we know that he listens to God and seeks God's advice. So all these actions that we see him doing, we can have confidence that it's exactly what God's want. So the first one was to unite the kingdoms. Check. Done it. Got them all united. Pretty rough, but he got them united. He needed to select a capital that was going to be neutral. Just like I pointed out, Washington, D.C., that's what our founding fathers did, was they established our capital where the national rulers would be in a neutral territory, not showing favoritism to, one geographical area over another. Supposed to not to. Now he's got one more thing he's got to do. He's got to centralize the government with their religion, their faith, their worship. So he's got to come. He's going to bring them all into focus. If you go back and we start to think about Saul and the way that he was ruling and what he was working towards, none of it. He wasn't concerned about keeping them united. He wasn't concerned about, keeping them spiritual, because, we see that it's disjointed, the religious aspect of the government. And God set this up to be a theocracy. A theocracy is a government of religion, by religion. We are a democracy. We have separated church from state. But that's not the way the Israeli nation was to be established. It was a theocracy. And that was a problem under Saul, because Saul never consulted God. He never. Does it sound okay? Or is it a little loud? Oh, I can't really tell that well. Okay. So King Saul was never concerned about the spiritual side. He established his capital in an area of his homeland. He had the tabernacle off somewhere else. And so now, with that in mind, unite the tribes, centralize the capital that was in neutral territory, but now he's got to bring the religious, the theology of it, and unite it, which gives the importance. If you think about it, if you have the central government and everything that's located in one place, then the importance is being given. If you've got the king off somewhere else and you have the tabernacle and worship in another location, it's just not as beautiful and powerful message to everyone. But the king is where we worship. And so let's talk a little bit about the history and get some of this background, because it's important as we look at what's going on at this historical moment when it comes to the tabernacle. We know that without the tabernacle, there is no covenant. And then you say, well, there's all the 10 Commandments and stuff like that. Yeah, but you cannot please God and serve him and atone for your sins without sacrifice. So you have to, and the only place he specified was at the tabernacle. And so that's why the great detail of the building of the tabernacle while they were at Mount Sinai. So in the tabernacle, we have some very important locations inside the tabernacle. We have what we call the holy place, which the priest could come in and out. No Gentile, no women, and not just any man could come into this location here. Inside that, we have the showbread, we have the candles, we have the incense, stuff like this. But then you have the other location, which is the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies is where the ark resides. That's important as we come along and we start to look at what's going on, because the ark is what we're moving. And that is it's critical as we start to understand why it needs to be moved. If we look at just the building of the ark and the importance of what the ark is, we have to go to Exodus 25, starting in verse 18, and a little bit of reading here, but I think it's important. So let's go ahead and read 18 through 22, And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold. Of hammered work you shall make them. On the 2 ends of the mercy seat, make 1 cherubim on one end, 1 cherubim on the other. Of one piece with the mercy seat you shall make the cherubim on its 2 ends. The cherubim shall spread out their wings above, shadowing the mercy seat with their wings. Their faces one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubim be. And you shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark. And in the ark you will put the testimony that I give you. There I will meet with you. And from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you about all that I will give you in commandment for the people of Israel. So right away, there's this, we got this incredible picture, and we have this idea of the angels, the cherubim that are on opposite ends, wings forward, facing each other, with the wings also pointing in. But you notice, what is that mercy seat? Because that's what's important. Because he says right here that the mercy seat, he says, is where he is. And so once they put the 10 Commandments inside the ark, so there's an open area inside, and then you set it on top, then he says, that's from where I will speak to you the law which he was going to give them. So that tells us something about the importance of where God was. We understand, and we understand also coming into the temple that the Holy of Holies was where he dwelt, but it's more specific than that. It has to be right there. And that was something that during atonement that would happen, is that the priest would go inside and he would take a sacrifice and blood and go inside, and he would offer for his sins. And he would put blood on the mercy seat. Where's God? In the mercy seat. God demands blood because of atonement. So then he would come out, and he would come back in with blood, and he would repeat this process for the people's sins. So he couldn't even go in and stay. And there's just some fantastic Jewish traditions and such of where if the high priest went in, they put like a rope with a bell on it. I don't know how true. Some of the things I don't doubt, because people were truly afraid. And if the guy, the old priest got back there and had a heart attack, or let's say offended God, and he dropped dead, nobody wanted to go in and pull him out. So the thought was, we'll just use this rope and we'll just pull his body out. That shows you the reverence they have for being in the presence of God. That's the point. That's something that we need to think about. Now, what else was in the ark? Aaron's rod. So now this is before, in Exodus 25 here, it's before Aaron and the other things that occur. So that's why, when I read that, I wanted to ask, so what else is in there? Because we know that's not the only thing. There's something else in there too. What's the other item? The bread, manna. So there were items that were added, in other words, to it. So now we got the idea of the importance of the tabernacle and all the locations. And I know I'm kind of going over them a little fast, but I want us to understand the importance of that tabernacle. It was built, and it was of items and things in which they would wear out, and eventually you'd have to replace them. Weather, sun, and you notice that as a part of the Holy and the Most Holies, it had no hardwood cover. It was covered with a tent, which I thought is significant because, that shows you he doesn't need, he tries to tell David this, he doesn't need, when he says, I don't really need a place. I don't live inside a building. That's not where I'm at. But, man, you talk about the gold, talk about the timber. Mainly those are big beams that were set up and then strutted across, and then one in the middle for the doorway area, and then this huge drape across the top like we were looking at. So, and it was always being moved. So when we talk about historical locations, where it started from, we know it started at Sinai. That's where it was built. In comparison to the cost, which is important, because if we look at the cost to build that tabernacle today, exactly the way that they built it, we're talking multi-millions of dollars. I haven't done it since COVID pricing. I haven't done that because timber is really shot up. But, I've heard up to $5 million is what it took for them out of their money. So all the people, look at it, remember the effort, the call out for everyone to bring stuff. And remember, when they left Egypt, they came out pretty wealthy. The people gave them, the Egyptians gave them stuff. So all that ended up coming in that gold. So it took a lot of resources, dedication, a lot of craftsmen, people to put this together. Start out at Sinai. So they packed it up, and they move it, and they're going everywhere they go. When the Lord indicates it's time to stop, they stop and they set it up. When it's time to move, they pack it up, and it's a very specific order, isn't it? Down to one, we know the Levites were the only ones who could touch it and move stuff. There were some that were designated. They had their roles. So, and the way that they tore things down, and the way they lined it up, and where it was in the march order of all the tribes, the detail in all of that is what's very important, and very important for us to understand, again, the importance of this tabernacle to David and to the people. Now, when the people came into Canaan and they started going through and conquering, we know they brought the tabernacle with them. But it wasn't set up until close to the time that they had subdued both the southern and the northern area. And we see it in Joshua 18:1. And when the whole congregation of the people of Israel assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of the meeting there, and the land lay subdued before them. So that's the first time that we find of it being specifically mentioned as being set up at Shiloh. And that's really the last place until into more recent times when we get into 1 Samuel chapters 5 and 6, when Eli and his son Phinehas and Elias, they go out to battle. And that was a disaster. And this set in motion the relationship with God because of the people. So it was first taken out of the tabernacle from Shiloh and taken out to battle around Ebenezer or somewhere in there, Aphek. Now, it wasn't that they had used the ark before. The ark had power, and it was used in order to help encourage people and other things. But at this time, this was not something that they had sought the advice of God. Whenever they decided that they were going to go to battle, they decided, well, we're just going to go ahead and take the ark with us. And that didn't work out so well, did it?
Because they thought that was the only way they could win.
Yes, and
God was with them.
yeah, they figured, well, we got the ark, so we got God with us. God wasn't with them. Just because you got a piece of wood with a bunch of gold on it and the tablets and all that, God doesn't dwell there. When he wants to talk to us, then he would. But it doesn't mean you can drag him off the battle. That's what it kind of made me think of when I think of that story. It's like, well, we'll take God with us, go get the ark. That means he's got to be there with us because we've got the ark. And it really did bring a lot of fear in the Philistines. The Philistine camp, when they saw it coming, they were very fearful. And they started to lose their desire to fight, and it was their own commanders. When you read that battle, you find out that their own leaders, the Philistine leaders, came in and just kind of rebuffed them and said, "No, we are not going to fall back." And so they fought, and they won. And when they did, they captured the ark. But that's not all, because they invaded all the way in, and they destroyed the tabernacle. So now we have, like I said, the tabernacle, which is something you have to have if you're going to fulfill the law of Moses. And inside that, even if it's missing the ark, you've got the place that you can offer sacrifices and all of this, but where God's supposed to be represented if it's not there? So there's a lot of question. I did a lot of reading and trying to find out. And there's several thoughts on what happened to the tabernacle when they captured the ark. In 1 Samuel chapters, if you start at 4 through 6, and you look at that engagement, it never really talks about what happened with it. But we know that we never see sacrifices again in Shiloh. We find later on that it's moved, but it was, most scholars believe it was destroyed or somehow it had to move. And that's why I'm kind of waffling, because I don't know it's that important, because there are some good points, because when we come to them, when David brings the tabernacle into Jerusalem, it doesn't say that. It says he built a tent. So it's kind of interesting. It's elusive, but there's some that say, like the articles, where did all the articles go as far as the showbread, the basins, the other articles that were a part of this? We know where the ark went, but when it comes to the rebuilding and all this, we'll see there's some ideas that they lost the tabernacle. And I believe that they rebuilt something, a tabernacle in Nob. So when this happened, this is something that is important when we look at the idea of when they got it back, because we know that the Philistines, it was nothing but a terror to them when they had the ark. The ark was just nothing but a terror. No matter where they took it, they put it in with their god dog or drog or something, and it falls over. They move it to one of his house. They all get tumors and all this, and then so they finally come up with a plan, and they're going to put it on a cart with some, animals that can guide them, get it off, kind of like a bomber, just send it off. And it does. It comes in and it goes to Beth Shemesh, and it's Jewish. It's in the Jewish, Israel, in the Hebrews' hands, but then all of a sudden they open it up and look in, and they end up getting punished. So they end up asking, we need to get it moved. We want it out of here. So this is when we come into 1 Samuel 7, verses 1 and 2. And the men of Kirith Jearim come, and they took up the ark of the Lord, and they brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. And they consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From the day that the ark was lodged at Kirith Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. So when we see that by the time it does come back, it's not back with the tabernacle. They don't place it back. So to me, that's another indication that the tabernacle is non-functional. So there's a problem with the tabernacle and being there. It's only 9 miles from Jerusalem. But Jerusalem doesn't exist yet, you see. It's Jebus. So we're going to look at the map, because it's kind of interesting how all these things start to come together right around Jerusalem. But it's sitting on a hill. It's in a secure hands. And it sits there, as in Samuel, it says, close to 20 years before it gets moved again, and that's going to be by David. Now, when Phinehas' wife, going back, hears about the death of her husband, her brother-in-law, and all this, she goes into labor. But one of the things she says is what is happening nationally, spiritually, that is so important about the ark. And she said in 1 Samuel 4:22, and she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." So this is before they ever get it returned back. This is right after they lose the ark and it's gone. This is why it says that the nation lamented. That they lamented because they lost it. They understood the great importance of it. That we can rebuild the tabernacle, but we have to have God. An empty tabernacle without God is not the same. You can continue to do sacrifices and such. So when we talk about what happened to that tabernacle, I do believe it was destroyed. Most of the historians believe that somehow it was destroyed. There's some thought that at Shiloh there was a semi-permanent structure that the Holy and Most Holies, that section there, was built with a solid structure, and that whenever the priests heard about the loss of the ark, that they packed everything up that they could and they moved it and they got out of there. So it would still fit that when the Philistines got there, they were able to destroy the physical walls of the tabernacle, but they still missed some of the articles. And because when Solomon builds the temple, there's some, and I don't see how they see it. Like I said, I try to see it, but when he describes rebuilding and recreating the articles from the temple, they're saying that it's like he had the originals and he created and made more of them. And we'll get to that later on, but to me, I couldn't see that. If it is, that's okay. But we do know that the ark never came back into a tabernacle. That's the condition that we're in right now. And that they never went back to Shiloh. Remember when Saul murdered all the priests? And that's why in that horrible story in chapter 22 of 1 Samuel 19, I just pulling out this part, but we learn, and Nob, the city of the priests. So what else is at the priest? Place of sacrifice. So they could continue to sacrifice all day long, but without the ark, well, it's still not the way that God had intended. And I'm not going to say that there was no atonement and stuff, but the glory of God, in a sense, is left, which describes the state of their spiritual condition during from the time that Eli dies all the way up until David starts to come. You notice that condition existed, and yet Saul did nothing. Saul never thought about, you know what, let's get this tabernacle put together. Let's bring that ark and put it in the Holy of Holies where it needs to be. Why didn't he do that? And he ruled for many years, and yet he never did. So this is something David sees that's important, that he knows that needs to happen. And that's why I said when we look at these locations of where the priests were. Now, all the priests except for Benadad is the one who he ran, he fled, and he made it to David with the ephod, and that he then is with David. But Nob is there, and it's about, like I said, I think Nob's about 15 miles, but it's still close in the proximity if you look at where Jerusalem is up here on the map. And the ark is sitting over there in Kiriath Jearim, about 9 miles away. So, yeah, it's got a little distance to go, but it's not where it needs to be. And that's the objective that David is trying to do, is to bring the spiritual part of the government together to unify and to build that relationship back with God. So David makes what I think is interesting, is very brilliant, and shows his wisdom, is to bring everyone involved. You remember I read where it said, and then they lamented because of the ark, what was going on. And so David, he does the wisest thing in 1 Chronicles. This is where we'll go to Chronicles 13, 1 through 3. And David consulted with the commanders of 1,000 and of hundreds, with every leader. And David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you and from the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who will remain in all the lands of Israel, as well as to the priests, the Levites, and the cities that have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us. Then let us bring the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. So, I wonder if looks like my chat may be working again. I don't know. Oh, I think it might be. Okay, good. Looks like my chat's connected. So if you have some, fire it off, because we're going to get into some discussion. So David is king. There's nobody higher than him. I mean, he could do whatever he wants. But one of the aspects we find of this spiritual leader is that he still gets the people involved. And it's a learning point, because he makes this awareness to the entire nation, all the tribes. It's expressing, he could have just went, got the ark, moved it, built the tabernacle, and just went on. But look at the difference where he first gets it out to all the tribes. He lets them know. He wants them to understand the importance of what they need to accomplish. He also is, in a subconscious way, reminding them of the spiritual fracture that they have in their relationship with God. The tabernacle and the ark are not in the same location. So that is something that he says to them. So if it seems good to you, it's kind of a rhetorical question, because he knows that this is what it is. So then let's send the messengers out, and as well as the priests, Levites. Everything's going great. This is a great plan, that he starts out with, that he wants to do. And then he says, let's bring it back. And he reminds them of the condition that they had during the time of Saul, which this again is a comparison between Saul and David and the uniqueness between their different spiritual condition. I set up some time here for us, a little bit more time, because I think we need more time instead of me trying to jam out so much information to kind of discuss it. So one of the things that I want us to remember is, what are the objectives of David as king? What's he trying to accomplish? Some things I said. And that was, so they're trying to bring him back to God. And so that one of his objectives was he needed to unite them, because they were fractured. Unite them back to God. And well, as a family, they were pretty dysfunctional. I'm trying to get on here where you can make sure I can see some people if you're interacting. Yeah, it is amazing the influence that Saul was having on them, and the problem that they were allowing him in fear to keep them from doing. There were priests who knew. We know there were some spiritual people who understood that what they were doing as far as worship and where the ark was, where did it belong? That's kind of the key thing, is where does this belong? And it's not where it's located. But it's also God, kind of showing what was important to them. What did they think, compared to when they started being disgusted with Samuel? They wanted a king. They wanted to have a king that looked like everybody else. And it just shows again the absurdity of looking on the outside, looking superficial, and believing that somehow we're pleasing God by that part, where we need to look at the spiritual side. And that's the difference between these two kings is that. So the third one, the objective was the fact that he wanted to unite them. He wanted to establish that capital, get that city, unite them spiritually as well. So all three of these together were going to help restore that relationship with God and bring the people back into that proper relationship nationally. So, and he accomplished all of them except for the last. That last one is the one that he is still going to do. And when we talk about it next week, we look at problems. David's not a perfect man because he doesn't consult with the Lord. We don't find him at that one time. And tragic outcome in that first. When Uzzah is killed, they try to move it wrong. So where did Joshua set up the tabernacle the first time when it came into the land of promise?
It's not that Baal Judaism.
Hmm?
Baal Judah.
It was at Shiloh when he came in. You know what? Your translation may have. That's right. That's right. I forgot. There is another name. Yes. And that's significant when we think about the location and how long that it lasted there. And again, because of the people, they're the ones who had made the choice that they were going to choose what they wanted. So what happened? What happened to the tabernacle and the ark?
Well, they tried to transport it.
Well, prior to this dilemma, the situation is we have no real idea where tabernacle's at, and then the ark. What got him into that condition? Maybe that's a better. It goes all the way back to Eli. Whenever he had failed to discipline his children and they were so sinful. Samuel was a little boy when this occurred. He was serving. Remember that whole conversation when the Lord's coming to Samuel and talking to him, and then he goes to Eli and tells him, gives him the bad news. And that's exactly what happened. Was when they had gone to battle against the Philistines, they took the ark and then the tabernacle. So it's a very powerful message because it shows that God is demonstrating not only through the physical punishment, but in that the end result was going to show also the spiritual fracture, that no longer do we have a tabernacle and we don't have God's presence in the same location. And this stayed that way well beyond 20-something years, because Samuel was a young man by the time David comes along. So I get crazy sometimes on the timelines, but it had to be close to 50 years or so they're broke. They're completely broke. What is David trying to accomplish by moving the ark? I'm not getting any input, so I guess you're it. Rhett, any ideas? Why is he trying to move? What's he trying to accomplish by moving that ark?
We know he was not going to be allowed to build the tabernacle.
Wait a minute. Tabernacle or the temple?
The temple.
Yeah. See, it's never used. See, that's interesting because we never have that word, and maybe it's just because of the Hebrew and the way we're translated, but because when he does finally get it there, he describes it as he built a tent for it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that he just built some ragged old thing and threw it up over it. I think that he would be advised on the pattern and everything the way Moses had prescribed. But if you look at the amount of money and resources that went into that original, and that's why some people believe that maybe the Philistines didn't totally destroy the tabernacle, and that they were able to, because you think of the millions of dollars of value that if the Philistines were able to, after they captured the ark, go to Shiloh and take all of those, they'd have melted everything down. And we know that, like, whenever the first temple's destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, one of the times when he comes, he takes all the articles out, and they're secured. And they're able to be available whenever the second temple's built. So I think there is some logic that the tabernacle articles and some of the stuff was protected, that when the ark was captured by the Philistines, then that the priests would have been given some heads up, because it wasn't like they're in vehicles, but somebody on foot could have got there to Shiloh and said, hey, we've been overrun, they took the ark, it's a disaster, we got to pack it up. And also, remember, the Philistines, even right when David had first taken over, remember what happened when Saul was killed? The 10 northern tribes for 7 years had been just walked over by the Philistines coming in and out. So they would have been looking. So I think, there is some logic, the idea that they were hiding and protecting a lot of the original stuff from the original tabernacle. But it is interesting that but I thought it was interesting because the focus seems to be on one thing. And that's going to get us into our bonus round. I just made that up when I was doing this. Bonus round. So why didn't he move the tabernacle first? Hey, you get the tabernacle and you get the ark, you get it there. Were you going to sit it outside? You're going to bring it inside? I mean, you would think that, well, it's secured where it's at. So let's build a place for it. Let's get this place built. Now, I'm going to tell you, we don't have every detail, so it's very possible that maybe it was already established. But there's also a side of this that we're not being told the importance as much. The focus seems to be towards the tabernacle. Towards the ark.
But in 7:6 it says that God told David, since the time that I brought the children of Israel up from Egypt, even to this day, but have moved about in a tent and in a tabernacle.
Tent and tabernacle, yeah. Well, the tent was the actual location. So, when you call a tent a tabernacle, but you can't, the tent was what the tabernacle was. That's why, like, when we talk about temple, we say temple. Well, that was mortar, brick, a very solid structure. And so when he's talking there to David, saying, when he's talking about building him a permanent home, that I'm fine with living this way. So I think one of the reasons of focus, or why we're not even really told by the writer of Samuel, is because that ark was important, much more You want God with you. And that's what it would be symbolically. And nationally, the importance of showing people that now you have the ark with the king, the anointed one from God, and now you have the ark in the same presence. So that's one of the reasons I kind of answer it, is why is it important to have the ark in Jerusalem? You remember that what was the original design for the government of Israel? Well, God was his king. But in the giving of the law, we find kind of prophetically where God tells them that when you do get a king, I always love that. It's just like, why do you even mention that if that's not a part of the organization structure that you want? But he knew that it was coming, and he said what? He said, and when you get a king, he wanted him to have a copy of the law and have it close by him all times. And I think having the close proximity to God and the king, the physical king, would help that relationship. And it also demonstrates a unity to all nation, the whole nation in that one location. I really do think that helped to put God out of Saul's mind because he wasn't around it and he wasn't there.
But I also think that he wanted that to be a pattern for us today. I mean, God is going to be the king, but for a nation to be successful, that leader has to be one reliant upon God.
Yes, and it shows it. That Becky's saying that God's the king, and the leaders that we have to be reliant on God. Did I say that right? Phrase it right? And that's a truism today, is that we do have a king, don't we? And it's structured the way God had wanted it. Remember, the Old Testament is a shadow of the things that were real. So even David was a shadow of the real king, which was the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And where's he at? He is right there in the Holy of Holies, if you want to call it that, right there, because he can coexist in that location because he is pure. Man couldn't do it. Man would always have to take blood, remember, and go in and out. He couldn't stay in there. But now we do have the real. So the illustration, though, now is that man, and the way God has us set up, is we have to rely on our relationship with Christ, our high priest, and the one who intermediates for us as well. Well, that's all I've got. I'm sorry I don't know what's going on. Always something. But if you have some comments, let me know. There is a very high possibility I will not be here next week because I'm going to Phoenix. My aunt passed away, and I've been asked to do the services, so I've been talking about next week doing the class as far as what our topic is, but probably won't be back for that class. So, but we'll pick it up next 2 weeks, if not. So thank you very much. Blessed